Do you know that young children possess the ability to learn multiple languages at an early age? Today, we will dive really deep into this topic of language immersion and the benefits of learning a second or even a third language from an expert. I have my friend and language immersion specialist, Luisa Weinstein, that's here, and we'll get to know her today. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you very much for having me here.
Well, okay, let's begin. Where does your passion for languages start?
I have always loved languages. I remember when I was in the university, then I moved to the US, learned English. Then I decided to move to China. In China, I learned Chinese, but then I also learned French when I was in China. And I just love the fact that we can communicate with multiple people. And when you learn a language, you don't only learn the language. You learn about the culture. You learn about why people think different, why people make the choices they make. And I think it's really inspiring to learn about the world. It really opens your eyes to multiple things that otherwise you'll not be able to see.
Do you learn multiple language when you were an adult?
Yep.
Right? So guide us through that journey. Was it harder to learn it when you were as an adult?
Well, definitely when you're an adult, the way the brain works is completely different than when an early child starts learning languages. Because as an adult, you have to make it more conscious. Then you have to learn routines. You have to learn different patterns and things that if you were a child, it would just come automatically because at an early childhood, a child's brain is already built for it.
Well, I want to know something because I have an accent in every language that I speak. How come you don't have any, you speak fluently all these languages?
Oh, I'm completely far from it, but I think that sometimes it does not matter about the having an accent. The most important thing is being able to communicate your emotions, being able to get in touch with other people, and being able to learn from other cultures.
That's beautiful. So where does that interest in early childhood and the early years started? How did that guide us through that process?
Well, my journey with education definitely did not start in a classroom. It actually started when I became a mom. I'm Colombian, so my mother tongue is Spanish. And we were living in the US with my husband. And for me, it was non-negotiable that my children needed to learn my mother tongue. I wanted them to communicate with my family, to learn about their roots. So when our firstborn was born, my husband and I agreed, okay, we're going to have a bilingual dynamic. But I had lived in China before. And my husband just kept on saying, you should definitely teach our children Chinese. You should definitely teach our children Chinese. And I'm like, yeah. And I was a little bit skeptical about it because I knew I was fluent in business Chinese, not in raising children Chinese. It's something completely different. But then we said, you know what? Why not? What's the worst thing that can happen? After all, it's just one more language, right? So we decided, okay, let's set this trilingual dynamic. We're going to teach them English, Spanish, and Chinese. And now I was in charge of like having all the information to them from Spanish and Chinese so they could learn it. Now, I had to get very creative because we didn't have a support system, right? And especially because I was teaching a language that was not my mother tongue. So I was, okay, let's do videos. Let's start doing a lot of trial and error. Let's wear bandanas. Are they going to get confused? Because there are all these myths about, well, children are going to get confused. They're just not going to be able to communicate or speak anything. I remember I even learned sign language and I started teaching them sign language just in case too. And also because I wanted them to learn in inclusive language. But then I started creating all of these resources. I started making videos. I started making posters, flashcards. And little by little, I had so many resources that I said, why only my children? I should help other children learn multiple languages as well. And that's when something called LuluTom was born.
I love that. So tell us about LuluTom and how you started it and the wonderful program that is now scaling here in Central Florida.
So Lulu and Tom are these two puppets, and they're the ones teaching children multiple languages. And it got to the point that there were so many resources that we made books, and we started teaching. We brought this program into 2 schools, so children would be able to see and learn from all the resources I had made. Because one thing is to teach your own children, but something completely different is see if other children can learn as well, especially when they haven't had any background speaking a second or a third language.
And what was your experience then when you took it to in a community level?
It was amazing. It was unbelievable. I thought it was going to take longer, to be honest, because we were talking about having like certain class a month, right? And then children just picked it up so fast. They would see me on the parking lot. They would see me on the corridor. And immediately they would start speaking Chinese to me just by looking at me. They would say hello in Chinese. They would say thank you in Chinese. And they would start using every single word. Now, Marnie, you're talking about 2 years old singing in Chinese, saying words in Chinese. Children that don't have these languages at home. And their brains were just so active and absorbing them.
Well, full disclosure, these are the Young Innovators Academy in Oviedo and in Winter Park. And it was such an amazing journey for the kids and for the teachers, because not only the children started speaking in Chinese and in Spanish, but also the teachers. So what are the benefits? What did you learn from this experience? Is early childhood the best time to introduce languages?
Absolutely. I wish that I had learned as many languages when I was younger. And the reason behind it is the brain is built for it. There's something that researchers call the sensitive period for language. Any language, and as many languages as you want to give it to a child. So from 0 to 6 or 7, children's brain just is wired to learn patterns, to recognize sound, and meaning to full immersion. So children don't know they're learning English or Spanish or Chinese. They just know they're learning different forms of communication. And that's what really, really matters.
That's amazing. I'm fascinated that you just share that the children would see you and they would start speaking to you in that language. What was the experience with the parents? Were the parents concerned that introducing a second and third language, were they concerned about that?
There were some parents that were a little bit afraid at the beginning because there's so many myths behind it. And one of the most common myth is that children are going to get confused. And what research has shown and my own experience, me communicating with my children in 3 different languages, and then them being able to switch back and forth effortlessly shows something completely different. So children are not getting confused. Again, their brain works different. Their brain is wired for that. They just know it's a different form of communication. But after they started seeing how children were just getting joy out of it. They were just singing the songs. They were teaching other friends. They were teaching their parents. They just were very ecstatic, especially because in every class, the children would have a coloring sheet after all our routines. And these coloring sheet they would take home, and the parents were able to scan a QR code in it and kind of keep on practicing all the things that we have learned during the class. So at the end of the day, it just didn't turn into one class for languages. It became a full activity with the parents to get closer and create more connection with their own children.
I think that was fascinating. One of the things that I enjoy the most is that immersion experience, because you came dressed up in the traditional costumes in China, and you look different. You brought so many different types of things, and it was not a language class. It was an immersion experience. So what is the difference between that language class and an immersion experience?
Absolutely. And we're talking about culture here. Because when you teach a language, you cannot teach a language without teaching the culture as well. They go hand in hand. A child learns a set of words. They memorize these words, but they're not only memorizing words, they're also learning how children live. What do they eat? Why they made the choices they make. For example, the word red in Chinese, 红色, is not only a word. It's not only the word red. The red in Chinese culture is a symbol of happiness, a symbol of prosperity, a symbol of good luck. Children learn that. Children learn to connect that the red envelopes in Lunar New Year, the red lanterns, was showing them about the culture. So they were not only learning words, they were living, they were seeing, they were experiencing the language.
That's awesome. What was one of the most fascinating stories or experience that you had at the school?
Oh my God, so many. I mean, one of them is definitely the smile in Miss Leandra's face. And Miss Leandra is the chef is in one of the schools. And we made this entire activity where I told children, okay, Miss Leandra is learning Chinese as well. And because we're not going to see each other every day, I need you to help Miss Leandra practice her Chinese words. Every single day that they would see Miss Leandra, either in the classroom or in the restaurant in the school, children would just start using their magic words, saying hello in Chinese, thanking her in Chinese. It was amazing. Or when I would walk into the school and the children would see me in the parking lot or in the corridor, they would just start singing the songs. But there's one story that really makes my heart melt. And it's this one child. His parents are Chinese. And when we started the program and when we introduced the program, they were like, well, our child has some speech delays in English and in Chinese. And we feel that Chinese is one of the battles we need to let go of. Because we're really focusing, and this is what the speech therapist is saying, which I completely respect, and every dynamic is different. So every class I would go and I would see him, and he would not say a word to me. All the children were singing and saying the words and the magic words and numbers in Chinese, and he would just stare at me, would not say a word, nothing. It went on for a month, 2 months, 3 months, not a word. All the other kids using their Chinese words. And he would just look at me. But then one day, the same routine, the magic words and the singing and the dances and the coloring. And then when it was time for the numbers routine, he just started saying every single number in Chinese. 1 to 10, he started using the magic words. And from that moment on, he just spoke, and he was one of the most active children in the class. He was one of the ones saying it the loudest, the proudest. And what that showed me was, with time, with patience, and with consistency, children are learning things. We might not see it, but definitely their brain is busy working and absorbing the information until one day you see the magic happen, but it takes time.
That is such a beautiful story. And let's talk about myths, because there's a lot of myths surrounding introducing a second and third language. A lot of parents are worried that it might cause delays, or that it might get confused, or whatever it is. What are the most common myths that you've had to unpack for parents?
One of the most common myths is that children are going to get confused. And the other one is that they're going to have speech delays. Now, it's important to understand every child is different. Every child's dynamics, every child's times is completely different. But children, and research has shown, children don't get confused. Their brain has the ability, the elasticity is wired to recognize patterns and to make groups. Now, some of the things that I usually tell parents is, they're like, well, but the thing is, my child is mixing languages. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with the mixing languages as long as it's coming from the child. And that's called code switching, when a child is using, let's say, the target language and all of a sudden incorporates a word from another language. It's not that the child is getting confused. The child knows that that's not the word for that set of language, right? But the child's brain is being efficient. The child needs to communicate an idea. And what the brain is doing is, okay, I'm just going to borrow this word from this vocabulary because I just don't know what the word is. And I just need to communicate. And that's when code switching happens. So if some parents are experiencing this, what I would say is nothing wrong with that. What you need to do is you need to feed that word to the child. The child needs input. The child needs more vocab. So he's able to use more words. So if a child just uses agua instead of water or the other way around, what the parent needs to do is just feed that word. Oh, agua. And you'll see how your child might just repeat it. And then it might stay there and stick there.
Wow, that's fascinating. You have such a wealth of knowledge. But in practice, at home, what can parents do to switch from one language to the other in multilingual households? How do you do it at home?
Well, we had different dynamics. It was, again, trial and error. When I started this dynamic, I was really concerned that my son, because let's say that Maxwell, my first one, was the experiment. I didn't know if it was going to work out. We have different ways to do it. One is called time and place, where basically you say, okay, what we're going to do is whenever we go to the playroom, we're going to use Spanish. And then you feed your child with the language for the playroom. If you're there's also something called the OPOL method. One parent, one language, where one parent communicates solely in one language and the other parent communicates in the other language. When we started our dynamic, my husband was the one in charge of the English department, but I was the one in charge of the Spanish and the Chinese department.
Oh, wow.
And what happened at the beginning is I was communicating 2 weeks in Spanish and 2 weeks in Chinese.
Was that confusing for the child?
Not for the child. It was very difficult for me because some days I was like, what language am I speaking today? And that's why I started like wearing bandanas and like color-coded bandanas and creating all these things because I really wanted my children to learn. But my children were learning. I was the one that was not sure. But when you see your child that starts speaking and communicating, it's just amazing. And you see that all the things you've done are working out.
How about their Chinese? How is your children's Chinese?
They communicate with me solely in Chinese. They're now 6, 7, and 5. And we have all our interactions in Chinese. And sometimes, like for me, it's the day-to-day. But there are times that I step back and I'm like, I can't believe they're speaking Chinese. I can't believe all these resources, all these things I created worked out. And now they're speaking and communicated solely in Chinese.
And so if a child is exposed to a language early in his life and then they don't have the opportunity to practice, do they lose that language? What happens?
I would not say they lose the language. I would say that it just gets stored a little bit deeper in their brain. And that's what happens when you used to speak a language and then you stop practicing. You start forgetting the words, but then you just need to immerse yourself into the country where they speak the language. And in 1 or 2 weeks, things are going to start coming out. Why? Because it's there. It's there. It's just more difficult for the brain to access that information because the brain likes efficiency. And the brain is just going to choose those words that are easy to access.
That's beautiful. What an amazing story. Like you, when I was a young mom, I also exposed my children to 4 languages before they were 5. And it was an experiment, just pretty much like you started. And they had their German department with their grandparents that were German and French. They had to come to the US, so I immersed them in English. but I always talk to them in Spanish. So like you said, they spoke like they had a different person that communicated with them in different language. But sometimes when we didn't want anybody, to this day, that we don't want somebody to understand, we just speak in German or in French. So I think there are, and one of the things that I observe, because they learn languages at such an early age, they don't have an accent. They speak like a native speaker in English, French, German, and Spanish. And for me, that was fascinating because I do have an accent everywhere I go. But why is that? Why do children, when the younger they learn a language, the easier it is for them to absorb the accent?
Well, when we're born with the capacity to reproduce any phoneme in any language. The brain has this capacity. But then if the brain sees that it's not using it, it's going to start a process called pruning, where the brain is like, okay, I need to be efficient. I need to focus on other tasks. And this child is not going to use this software. So I need to start getting rid of it because I need to give it space for him to actually use other ability and make other connections. That's why children, the earlier, the better. The earlier they learn a language, the earlier and the easier it is for them to start reproducing all these sounds, because the brain already has the capacity to do it. So what I would say is expose your children to multiple languages. But what this is going to do is give the brain the capacity to maintain an ability that already has.
Oh, this is fascinating. So I'm pretty sure that after this podcast, a lot of parents at home are going to be very excited about introducing their child to LuluTom. Are you planning to maybe make this accessible for parents and other schools?
Absolutely. So people can access to our books. We have one of the books, and actually the book that we were doing the piloting program at Young Innovators is the LuluTom Starter Kit, My First Words in Chinese, where children learn their first word, the first 200 words in the language. And we actually have it for English, for Spanish, for Chinese, and also for French. And then they're just not only getting a book, it's packed with printables, it's packed with dynamics for the parent to do, it's packed with activities for the child to reinforce the same words in different areas. It comes with labels, so parents can label things around the house. And it comes with the videos, because sometimes we just don't know how to say things like a native speaker. So that's why we have Lulu and Tom, native speakers, communicating and saying how to pronounce these words in the proper way.
And how can parents purchase this program?
You can go to www.lulutom.org. And here you're going to have all the books and other resources for when children also start learning to read and write, because everything is color-coded. So for instance, Chinese is color-coded in red, and French is color-coded in purple, and Spanish color-coded in green, and English in blue. So for a child, when they start reading these words, they observe, oh, these words in green is Spanish. It's just easier to read it based on the knowledge they have already acquired.
Thank you so much for putting such a wonderful program together to immerse the next generation in these experiences and multicultural education. You have been a wonderful guest at this podcast, and we're going to share your resources and encourage parents to purchase these kits and start becoming their child's first teachers at home. It doesn't matter if they don't know the language, because there are videos that go along with your resources. And if you like this podcast, thank you so much for being here. I wish we had more time. But if you like this, please share and subscribe and share in your media that LuluTom is a wonderful resource, and we highly recommend it. And we recommend you experience this with your children at home, because it's going to be definitely a cultural experience for the entire family. And if you like this podcast, Raising Innovators, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time.